She was cast out of town for being too poor, but the Apaches welcomed her for being rich in heart. Margaret Wilson clutched her worn leather satchel to her chest as she walked away from White Cliff, the dust of the small Arizona mining town still clinging to her threadbare boots. At 32, with calloused hands and prematurely graying hair tucked beneath a faded bonnet, she carried everything she owned in that satchel and a small wooden trunk balanced precariously on a borrowed mule. The year was 1882, and the West was unforgiving to widows without means. "You're a burden on the town's resources," Mayor Griffith had told her that morning, his handlebar mustache twitching with disdain. "Since Thomas died in that mine collapse, you've fallen behind on rent, and the general store can't extend any more credit." What the mayor hadn't mentioned was how quickly he'd sold her husband's mining claim to the Consolidated Western Company once Thomas was buried, or how the town doctor had charged exorbitant fees for failed treatments when consumption had taken hold in her lungs last winter. As Margaret crested the hill overlooking the valley, she paused. The San Carlos Apache Reservation lay 20 miles ahead, where she'd heard a Christian mission needed help. It was her only hope, a place no respectable white woman would normally venture, but desperation made such concerns trivial. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as she trudged forward. By midday, her water skin was half empty, and the cough that had plagued her since winter returned with a vengeance. Resting beneath the sparse shade of a mesquite tree, Margaret pulled out her most valuable possession, a small, leather-bound journal filled with botanical sketches and notes on medicinal plants, knowledge gleaned from her grandmother and expanded through her own observations. "What good is knowing how to heal when no one values it?" she whispered to herself. The mining company doctor had scoffed at her suggestions of mullein tea for her cough, preferring his mercury compounds and bloodletting. As the afternoon waned, Margaret spotted movement in the distance, 3 riders approaching fast. Her heart raced as she recognized them as Apache men, their dark hair flowing behind them, their postures indicating a lifetime of horsemanship. Fear gripped her, memories of sensationalist newspaper accounts flooding her mind. The riders circled her once, expressions unreadable. The oldest among them, a man with deep lines etched into his face, spoke in broken English. "Why woman alone? Dangerous." Margaret, hands trembling, replied, "I'm seeking the mission at San Carlos. I'm a healer, or try to be." The man's eyes narrowed, then shifted to her satchel where her journal peeked out. He gestured toward it. Hesitantly, Margaret handed it over. The man flipped through the pages, stopping at a drawing of a particular plant. He nodded with what appeared to be approval. "Usen sends help when needed," he said, using the Apache word for creator. "Come, bad weather soon." Looking west, Margaret saw dark clouds gathering over distant mountains. The man was right. A storm was coming. With few options, she nodded and followed as they led her toward the reservation, away from the town that had discarded her, and toward an uncertain future among people she'd been taught to fear. The San Carlos Apache Reservation sprawled across the valley, a patchwork of government-issued canvas tents, traditional wickiups, and a few wooden structures near the agency headquarters. As Margaret approached alongside her guides, curious eyes followed her. Children paused in their play, women looked up from cooking fires, and men stood watchful and wary. "I am Nilchichi," the older rider introduced himself as they dismounted. The name she would later learn meant fragrant wind in Apache. "These are my sons." He led her to a wickiup at the edge of the encampment. An elderly woman emerged, her face a tapestry of years lived close to the earth. This was Nilchichi's mother, Nasha, meaning owl in their language. Nasha examined Margaret with sharp eyes before speaking rapidly to her son in Apache. He translated, "My mother says your breath sounds like rustling leaves. She wants to help." Inside the wickiup, Margaret sat awkwardly as Nasha prepared a mixture of crushed plants steeped in hot water. The dwelling was surprisingly cool and comfortable, constructed of arched poles covered with brush and earth. Various dried plants hung from the ceiling, many that Margaret recognized from her own studies, others entirely new to her. When Margaret sipped the bitter brew, the relief to her inflamed lungs was almost immediate. "Thank you," she whispered, genuine gratitude warming her voice. That night, she slept better than she had in months. The following morning, Margaret was awakened by the sounds of the camp stirring to life. Emerging from the wickiup, she discovered her trunk had been placed nearby, untouched. Her mule grazed contentedly with other animals. Margaret spotted Nilchichi speaking with a white man in clerical clothes, Reverend Harlow from the mission. She presumed. When they noticed her, both approached. "Miss Wilson," Reverend Harlow said, his tone formal. "I understand you've come seeking work at our mission." "Yes, Reverend. I have some education and knowledge of healing herbs." The Reverend's expression was skeptical. "We primarily need someone to teach reading and basic arithmetic. The government insists these children must be civilized." His distaste for the situation was evident in his tone. Margaret sensed she was being tested by both men for different reasons. "Perhaps we can find middle ground," she suggested. "Learning comes easier when it respects existing knowledge. I would be honored to learn from your healers, just as I hope to share what I know." Her response seemed to surprise the Reverend. Nilchichi's expression remained impassive, but he nodded slightly. "You may stay at the mission house until we determine your suitability," Reverend Harlow said finally. "We can offer meals and $2 a month." It was meager, but it was something. As the Reverend walked away, Nilchichi spoke. "My mother wishes to show you plants today. Different from your book, same purpose." Margaret clutched her journal. "I would be grateful for her teachings." That afternoon, Nasha led Margaret into the scrubland surrounding the reservation. Despite the language barrier, the universal language of plants bridged their worlds. Nasha pointed to a scrubby bush with tiny flowers, demonstrating how to harvest its roots. She mimicked symptoms, fever, pain, then showed preparation methods. Margaret's journal gained new entries, her sketches, accompanied by phonetic attempts at Apache names alongside her English botanical terminology. When Nasha indicated a plant Margaret recognized as yarrow, both women's faces lit with mutual understanding. By sunset, something had shifted. As they walked back to camp, Nasha placed a gnarled hand on Margaret's forearm and spoke a single word that needed no translation. "Shu Nzu-u, I am pleased." Margaret had made her first true connection, tentative but real, a fragile bridge between worlds built on the shared language of healing. 3 months passed. The mission schoolhouse, a simple adobe structure with rough-hewn benches, echoed with children's voices as Margaret guided them through English letters. But unlike Reverend Harlow's strict approach, Margaret incorporated Apache words alongside English ones, connecting the unfamiliar to the known. "Miss Wilson," interrupted Reverend Harlow from the doorway, his expression tight. "A word, please." Outside, the Reverend's displeasure was evident. "I've been informed you're teaching in a most unconventional manner. The Indian agency expects these children to abandon their language, not reinforce it." Margaret stood her ground. "They're learning English faster this way, Reverend. Respect breeds learning. Force breeds resistance. And I hear you've been absent from Sunday services to attend their—" He searched for a word. "Ceremonies." It was true. Margaret had witnessed her first sunrise ceremony for a young Apache girl entering womanhood. The 4-day ritual had moved her deeply with its reverence for feminine strength and community bonds. "I'm learning from them, just as they learn from me," she replied. The Reverend sighed. "The townspeople are talking, Margaret. They say you've gone native. Agent Brooks from the Bureau of Indian Affairs will be visiting next week. I suggest you consider your position carefully." As he walked away, Margaret noticed Nilchichi's younger son, Denali, watching from nearby. At 16, he was one of her brightest students, quickly grasping not only English but the science behind the medicinal properties Margaret taught alongside. "Traditional knowledge. They fear what they don't understand," Denali said in careful English. "Yes," Margaret agreed. "Fear makes people cruel. Like the soldiers who moved us here. he added, his eyes darkening with memories Margaret couldn't share. That evening, as Margaret gathered herbs near the stream that bordered the reservation, she encountered Nasha doing the same. Their initial awkwardness had evolved into a comfortable companionship. Through Denali's translations and their growing shared vocabulary, Margaret had learned that Nasha had been a respected healer among her band before relocation. Daughter of different skin, Nasha said, her name for Margaret. Tomorrow, important. Council. You come. Margaret was startled. Women rarely attended tribal councils, especially white women. The following day, Margaret sat nervously among the elders as they discussed the Indian agent's upcoming visit. The government had been reducing rations, claiming budget constraints while selling off portions of reservation land to mining interests. When asked her opinion, an honor she hadn't expected, Margaret suggested documenting how the Apache were, self-sustaining through traditional knowledge, and successfully adapting to new circumstances. Show them your strength, she advised, not just your need. Later, as they walked back to camp, Nilchichi explained, Council respects you. You see with clear eyes, not clouded by what whites believe about us. Margaret felt a weight of responsibility. In his words, I was blind before I came here, she admitted. I believed what I was told about your people, and now I see that wisdom doesn't belong to one people. It grows when shared. She paused, but I fear the Indian agent won't see it that way. Nilchichi's expression grew solemn. Then we must help him see. As darkness fell over the reservation, Margaret realized she no longer thought of White Cliff as home. Somehow, among people she'd once been taught to fear, she'd found belonging that the white town had never offered her. But with Agent Brooks's impending visit, she wondered how long this fragile peace would last, and which world she would have to choose. Agent Brooks arrived with 2 soldiers and White Cliff's Mayor Griffith in tow. His inspection of the reservation was methodical, counting rations, examining records, questioning Reverend Harlow extensively. Margaret noticed how he spoke about the Apache as if they weren't present, despite the tribal leaders standing right beside him. And this must be the woman I've heard about, Brooks said, finally acknowledging Margaret. The school teacher who's gone native, Mayor Griffith sniffed disapprovingly. She was always peculiar, even in town, filling people's heads with herbal nonsense instead of seeking proper medical care. Margaret felt her cheeks burn but kept her voice steady. I've been learning as much as teaching, Agent Brooks. The Apache have sophisticated knowledge of medicine and survival that complements Western approaches. Complementary. Brooks raised an eyebrow. Miss Wilson, these people need to assimilate, not maintain primitive practices. Before Margaret could respond, commotion erupted from the edge of the camp. One of the soldiers accompanying Brooks had fallen from his horse, which had been spooked by a rattlesnake. The man's leg was bent at an unnatural angle, his face contorted in pain. Without hesitation, Margaret and Nasha moved toward the injured man. They worked in silent synchrony, Margaret assessing the broken bone while Nasha gathered specific plants. The soldier's fellow officer reached for his pistol, uncertain, but Agent Brooks waved him down, watching with reluctant curiosity. Margaret set the bone with practiced hands, a skill she'd developed over recent months after helping with a similar injury in the camp. Nasha prepared a poultice for the swelling and pain. They fashioned a splint from materials Nilchichi quickly provided. Where did you learn to set bones? Brooks asked, clearly impressed despite himself. Here, Margaret answered honestly. From people you consider primitive. As they worked, other aspects of camp life continued around them. Children reciting both English and Apache words from Margaret's lessons. Women preparing food using techniques that efficiently conserved scarce resources. Men working on irrigation, systems that blended traditional knowledge with newer methods. Agent Brooks observed it all with growing thoughtfulness. That evening, a council fire was lit. Against protocol, Brooks accepted the invitation to attend. Mayor Griffith refused, returning to town in disgust. Under star-filled skies, tribal leaders shared stories of their people's history, not of savagery as newspapers portrayed, but of a complex culture with deep reverence for the natural world. Margaret translated when needed, adding context that helped bridge cultural divides. When it was her turn to speak, Margaret's voice trembled slightly. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Whitecliff saw only my poverty, but you saw something else, my willingness to learn, to share, to grow." She looked at Nasha, who nodded encouragingly. "You welcomed me when I was cast out, and in doing so taught me that true wealth lies in how we treat each other." Agent Brooks remained silent throughout, his earlier condescension gradually replaced by thoughtful consideration. The following morning, as Brooks prepared to depart, he approached Margaret. "I'll be recommending continuation of the educational program here, Miss Wilson, under your supervision. Your unorthodox methods seem to be yielding results." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "And I'd be interested in a written record of these medicinal practices. For the Bureau's archives, of course." Margaret smiled. "I'd be happy to compile one, with proper credit to the knowledge keepers." After Brooks departed, Nilchichi found Margaret by the stream where she often gathered herbs. "You have done good thing," he said. "Built bridge between worlds." "A fragile bridge," Margaret replied. "But it's a start." Nasha joined them, pressing something into Margaret's palm, a small bone amulet carved with symbols of healing. "You belong to no world and both worlds," she said in halting English she'd been quietly learning. "Good medicine." That evening, as the sun set over the reservation, Margaret sat outside her small quarters. No longer at the mission house, but in a cabin the Apache had helped her build at the camp's edge. Her journal lay open on her lap, pages now filled with knowledge from two traditions thoughtfully intertwined. A group of children gathered around her, as they often did at this hour, asking for stories. But tonight, it was Denali who spoke first. "Tell us your story, teacher," he requested. "How you came to us." Margaret smiled, looking out at the community that had become her home. "It begins with being cast out," she said, "and ends with being welcomed in." As night fell over the reservation, Margaret realized that true wealth had nothing to do with what one owned or where one lived. It lay in connections forged, knowledge shared, and barriers crossed. In hearts rich enough to see beyond difference, to the common humanity underneath. In the distance, coyotes called to one another under a rising moon, their voices weaving together just as Margaret's life had woven with the Apache, distinct threads creating a stronger whole.